25 seconds, okay. As the tension builds. Welcome to In the Room. It's our monthly series of in-person conversations with Connecticut's political leaders. I'm John Dankosky from the Connecticut Mirror. I'd like to first thank our sponsors for this series, our friends at the Mohegan Tribe, Connecticut Business and Industry Association, Eversource, Clifton Larson Allen, the Causeway Agency, Express Strategies, Hinckley Allen, and Rowthorne Law. So thanks to all of them for making this possible. Also, of course, we want to thank the people who support the Connecticut Mirror. If you value events like these and haven't yet made a recent donation to the Connecticut Mirror, you can do so through December 31st. Of course, you can do it all year round, but through December 31st, the end of this year, our gifts are being matched dollar for dollar up to $5,000 per gift. That's very exciting. So you can use the card on your seat if you're here in person with a QR code, or of course, if you're watching our live stream, you can donate via our website. It's ctmirror.org. Just hit that big donate button. I'm sure I'll be asking for money again later in the program. I also have a forward promotion. We're happy to announce there's a new series hosted by our economic development reporter, Erica Phillips. It's called This Could Work. It's a 4-part event series of one-on-one interviews with Connecticut-based entrepreneurs. And these interviews with entrepreneurs will start on January 14th. It's happening at Ferguson Library. I think this is in Bridgeport. In Stamford. More information about this series will be posted on our website, so stay tuned for this exciting new series with Erica Phillips. I'd like to welcome Sean Scanlon, our State Comptroller, to In the Room, and we're in your hometown. So first of all, thank you for having us here.
Happy to have you. Welcome.
This is a pretty exciting place. So we're at the Guilford High School Performing Arts Auditorium. You went to Guilford High School, but you didn't go to this Guilford High School. Do I have this right?
I went to Guilford High School, but not this Guilford High School, though I wish I went to this Guilford High School. It's a beautiful building, but I and many of the people in our community many years ago did a campaign to build this new high school, and that referendum passed overwhelmingly, and now we're sitting in a place that I think everyone in this community is really, really proud of.
Yeah, and you live here. You love this place.
I do, yeah. My family came here in the 1950s from New Haven. We have this very classic story. My mom's side of the family is Italian, and they had this big Sunday dinner, and my grandfather, who was a New Haven firefighter, got up and climbed the glass and said, "I have an announcement. I'm moving my family to Guilford." And he thought that everyone would be very happy about that, but they all laughed at him and said, "Joe, there's cows there, and there's dirt roads there." I think what he knew was that it was a place that he thought he could raise his family and give them a little bit more opportunities than he had growing up as the son of immigrants in New Haven. So they moved out here, dirt roads and all, and Mom grew up here, I grew up here, and now I'm raising my 2 boys.
Wow, so it worked out. Everyone was skeptical at first, but it was that move to the suburbs actually worked, I guess, before it was even the suburbs, really. How has Guilford changed over the years that you've been growing up and that you know this community?
So it's changed in a couple different ways. I think certainly when my mom was growing up, it was still more of an agrarian community, right? There was a lot more farming, there was a lot more of that sort of 1950s style of a community. And I think what I love about Guilford is that even though we have grown a lot, and there are a lot more people who live here now, and there's even more people who have moved in here in the last couple of years because of things like our amazing school system, is that we still have found a way to keep that local charm. And, our Guilford Green is what, we're known for, and around this time of year, it's a really magical place where the shops are decorated for Christmas, and there's people walking around, and I think we found a way to kind of keep that really tight-knit community. And we were joking before we started that when I got elected to this job, everyone said, "Well, you're moving to West Hartford now, right?" I would never move to West Hartford. I love this place. I'm so glad to be from here, and really proud to be raising my kids here.
There's a lot of people in West Hartford. A lot of people have moved to West Hartford. It's good to have you here.
That's what there's a lot of votes in West Hartford. No offense to West Hartford.
Exactly. When you were going to high school here, or when you were growing up, was there a point at which you said, I want to do this for a living. Like, I want to get out in front of people and talk about policy and politics. I want to get elected to office. I want to go ask people for money to get elected for office. I mean, were you thinking about that back then?
So in a weird way, I was, and that's a non-traditional thing. I was thinking about doing this. I wanted to be an actor. And I was in theater arts productions. I was in something called Voices, which is our select choir, and that's what I really thought that I wanted to do until some of my other friends said, hey, it's really hard to do that for a living, although you still can.
You can, absolutely.
I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and a guy by the name of Jim Powers, who no longer teaches here, but was my social studies teacher, he assigned me a book report on Bobby Kennedy, and I literally had no inclination to politics. Both my parents were not political at all, and this book report, as cliche as it sounds, literally changed my life. Because
really?
I, for some reason, caught this political bug, and was just taken with this idea that you could have a job where you go to work every day and try to help people out. And so I just got really into politics. The day after I graduated from Guilford High School, I read an article in the local paper that said a guy who had worked for Bobby Kennedy was going to run for the state senate in my district. And I was working at Guilford Subway at the time, and I was looking to do something besides working at Guilford Subway. So I called this guy on the phone book and I said, hey, so I'm 17. I don't know anything about anything, but you work for my hero, and I would love to work for you. And to this guy's everlasting credit, he gave me my first job in politics, and I guess ever since I've been somehow involved in it.
That's kind of wild. I guess just tangentially, I should ask: were you a good actor? I mean, what did you like about acting?
What I liked about it was, I guess, in some ways, I loved being able to sort of. This sounds strange, but transport to somewhere else and to do something different than what I was doing. I grew up. My parents grew up on the sticks, so I was raised here mostly by a single mom. I never traveled as a kid. I never went anywhere as a kid. I still have never even been to Europe and all the places that people go. But when you did things like those performances and those plays, you could go to those places and you could be there. And I just liked it. I thought, look, I was never like a serious actor. I don't think I was destined to be on Broadway or be the next Ben Affleck.
But those are skills that, I mean, and not to be too glib about this, but those are skills that come to work in politics. I mean, you have to talk to people all the time about things that maybe sometimes you wish you didn't have to talk to them about, and sometimes you have to be really excited about being at a chicken dinner when you're not all that excited about being at the chicken dinner. I don't know, there's a bit of acting that comes into this job, isn't there?
I think, there are some people who say, I think Reagan said it was a smooth transition from acting to politics, right? I don't want to give the impression, though, that all I do all day is pretend to be something.
Yes.
I like to think that I'm a pretty authentic dude, but what it did help me with was speaking in public and getting that confidence as a young person who's, 15, 16 years old to come out on the stage at the old auditorium, which was a little bit different, and be able to do it. It is something that I think definitely helped me be able to talk to people, but I stunk at remembering my lines. And that was okay when it was modern plays, but when it was Shakespeare, you can't really add it to that. So,
Yeah.
my career in theater was short.
Was short-lived. What did you learn from working with Chris Murphy?
Chris is somebody who, at the time when I started working for him, was just elected to his second term in Congress. So he was a very new member of Congress. And I went to college in Boston, and I thought that I wanted to go into law. So my dad actually died when I was a senior in college. And instead of taking the LSAT, like one of my friends did, I was coming back and forth to New York, where he lived, to try to reconcile with him, because we didn't always have that best relationship. So I put off law school, and I thought that I would go to work in law. So I went and did that, but I hated it. And I realized that I didn't really want to work in law. I wanted to get involved in politics. And I called Ed Meyer, who was the state senate candidate that gave me my first job. And I said, look, there's this guy, Chris Murphy. He's doing a lot of things that I agree with and I care about, and he seems like he's kind of going places. Do you think that there is a job in his office that you can call and see if I can apply for? And he did, as his driver, which is the most entry-level jobs in politics. But it's the best job in politics because you get to see up close what you may someday want to do, and you get to travel around. At the time, it was his district. And I learned job in the first place.
Could you talk more about that? I mean, because I've talked to a number of folks in this series about that, about what they get from going out and talking to people. Like, what do you get from actually having one-on-one conversations with some of the constituents in this room or other people that you meet?
The only reason I won at 27 was because I knocked on 6,000 doors. And there are some people in the audience here tonight that I recognize and remember knocking on their doors when I first ran in that first campaign. And I ran in that election against somebody who had never lost a local election and was seen as somebody who was, destined to definitely win that. I think I was just a kid, and I think a lot of people who were in the local party and, mentors of mine said, hey, you're going to run, and you're probably going to lose, but then you can always run again. And, there's this, there's life in politics after you lose. But I think I won because I went out and talked to people and had those conversations, and I think people were willing to take a chance on me because they felt like I, was idealistic and wanted to do something. And while that was 10 years ago that I was first elected, I still feel like I'm really idealistic and want to change things, and I think that shows.
But of course, there are probably things that you thought back then that you've since learned and that has changed your mind a little bit. Not to necessarily make you less idealistic, but just some reality. So give me a few things that you've learned in your time in politics, even as a young politician, where you're like, I thought it was this way, but it's kind of more this way.
Well, I think the biggest lesson that you learn is that you can have the best ideas, you can have the best intentions, and getting things done in politics is really very hard, right? Because there are special interests, there are votes you got to get. Sometimes the things that you want to do get screwed up a million different ways by a million different things that are beyond your control. And I think when you're first coming out in politics, that can really frustrate you. And the system is very frustrating, and it's very not meant for engagement as much as I think people like me would want it to be. Like, I got a part I was the youngest member of the legislature. Almost all of the older people up there, not to be mean, were like, hey, just go in the corner and sit there and listen for like 6 years, and then maybe you come back here and get some responsibility and you could do something. But I had all these ideas, and I wanted to knock on all those doors, and I had a little spiral notebook filled with all the things that people asked me to do. And the biggest lesson I learned, and that's really relevant to the job that I have today, is that when I got elected in 2014, Connecticut was in the midst of a big fiscal crisis. And all the things that I earnestly wanted to do, I was told no, for one reason only, which is because they cost money. And they had good intentions to do things, but they were expensive. And so my initial few years in politics were stifled by the fact that we had a crisis. And in part, one of the reasons why I decided to get involved in the budget process as a legislator was because that is what really dictates how things happen. And when you think about this from a political science exercise and finding power and finding how to use that power for what you want to do, everything revolves around money.
Sure. It's interesting, though, you talk about being a young legislator and people saying, go sit in the corner. As someone who's covered this for a long time, it sort of feels like that's also the way that they make laws, too, right? Like, well, we can't possibly do this thing that will help a whole bunch of people because it's not ripe yet. We've been talking about it for 20 years, but maybe next time we'll get to it. That really is the way it works up there a lot, and that's got to be frustrating for a young person who wants to, get crap done.
It is frustrating until you realize that it's in some ways an illusion, and that the narrative is go sit in the corner and eventually we'll give you something to do. But like all things in life, you can either take that for truth and fact, or you can say, actually, I don't vibe with that. I'm going to go and do this a different way. And that is what I did. And thanks to people like Matt Ritter, who was one of my best friends in politics, as he moved up, he gave me opportunities to lead. Joe Aristillowitz was a speaker during my tenure. He made me a chair as a sophomore legislator, which hadn't happened in a long time. So I think people saw that I wasn't taking no for an answer, and that I wanted to do more, and that people thought that I could do more, and I tried to seize those opportunities to get stuff done out there and really make a difference. And I was there for 8 years. I always say to people, and people in my office always tell me not to say this, I will never probably love a job more than being the state rep for my hometown, because every day it was such an honor to have been given this opportunity. And some politicians I go to work every day and try to do something about that. And I don't have that so much as a statewide elected official, but I try to bring that approach to this job.
So talk to me about the transition then to this job as state controller, because it is a different role, and I want to spend a little bit of time trying to get you to explain exactly what the job is, because I've talked to a few state controllers over the years, and on the radio, and we try to parse out, explain what you do again, because not everyone understands it. So we'll get to that in just a second, but what's the difference between being a legislator, who a lot of people think they're the ones who try to spend the money, and being the controller, which is someone who's sort of overseeing the pile of money that we have? It's a different mindset, isn't it?
Ed Meyer, I keep mentioning him because he really was, a father figure. He still is. He's still alive. But he told me a story once that is the complete way that I think of politics, which is, he said, "Do you know the best part of serving in elected offices?" And I said, "What is it?" He said, "You can open up a newspaper in the morning at your kitchen table, and you can read about something that's impacting your community. You can get a shower, put a suit on, get in your car, go to work, and do something about it." And that is the way that I've approached this gift, which is a gift, because it's time duration, but I will not do this for the rest of my life. I could lose in 2 years. You never know what's going to happen. So the time that I have is precious. And I try to take that approach to this job. When you're a legislator, you can open the newspaper, and on the front page or the local section or whatever, all of that is applicable to what you can do. And sometimes as comptroller, I have to stop myself to say, I have to focus on a specific thing now. However, the pushback to that is that everything that I do as the chief financial officer, I think is impacted by everything that happens in the state. And there isn't an issue, whether it's housing or healthcare or the environment, that doesn't touch our ability to grow our economy or doesn't involve our budget. And so it's a different purview, and it's a different lens of looking at issues, but I don't view my job as I somehow cannot engage on these issues simply because I'm not a legislator. It's just a different way to work on these issues, and the executive branch versus the legislature.
Okay, so give us the elevator pitch or whatever else. If you're standing around with a bunch of other top leaders in the state, someone would say, "Oh, you're the governor, I know what you do," and "Oh, you're the attorney general, you get to sue people." But the controller, what does he do?
It's easiest to explain this when I talk to people from Europe, because they're like, "Oh, you're the finance minister, right?" We don't have a finance minister.
It's a cooler title, to be frank. I mean, if you were the finance minister, people would get it, and it would sound kind of cooler, wouldn't it?
So I tell people that I'm the chief financial officer of the state, and the secondary title is the fiscal watchdog of the state, and I take both of those responsibilities pretty seriously. We pay all the bills in the office. We keep the books. We do auditing. We do a lot of the benefit procurement. So I run the largest healthcare plan in the entire state of Connecticut for an employer. 250,000 people get their health insurance through our office. So we do a lot of different things, but I have tried to do this job differently than my predecessors by really trying to take the really dense and wonky stuff that we do and distill that in a tweet or a 60-second video or an interview like this, where it can feel removed what we do, and it can seem very distant. But everything that I do and everything my office does is really important to the people of Connecticut, because it's their money that's flowing through our office, and every single thing we buy as a state comes to the company.
So a lot of your tenure here, basically all of your tenure in this job, though, has taken place in a different time in the state than other comptrollers in the past. People like Kevin Lembo had to deal with real serious fiscal crises, and sometimes they were at odds with the governor and other legislators over how exactly we were supposed to spend money, how big a problem we had. You and Ed Lamont don't really have that problem. You got oodles of money. Okay, so what do you do with it? And how do you think about that?
Well, the notorious PIG once said, "John, no money, no problems." It's
excellent name drop.
It's not so easy to say we've got big money and all our problems are gone. We've made incredible progress as a state, and we have, in my mind, ended the different part of this job, which is the bully pulpit, which is, as the constitutional officer, you can get attention for the things that you want to draw attention to. And Kevin was very good at doing that, and I am trying to do that in my own way. And I think it does make a difference because once you have gotten the credibility to talk about these issues, I think it gives you the ability to make a difference in these issues. And I think that all of us who have had this job see the responsibility of it and are trying to make a difference.
Okay, so yes.
So we're having some audio problems.
Okay.
Could you guys at least switch mics? Because your mic is okay, your mic has an echo. Since you're doing more talking, it might be better to have the person doing the answering have.
For those of you watching at home, I'm getting stage directions from the publisher of the Connecticut Mirror about a microphone placement. Let's switch microphones. Let's see. Okay. I don't think it's potentially any different. Maybe hold your microphone just a little bit further away from your from your mouth, just a little bit further away. Yeah, and see how that sounds.
All right.
Okay. We'll see what we can. Are we doing okay, folks?
We just switch it to his other lapel.
This is so exciting.
It was on this one. I just switched it.
All right. Is this just an attempt to keep me from asking questions about fiscal guardrails?
Speaking of my problem,
Talk about the fiscal guardrails, as they are called, that have allowed the state to get out from under this, in part, get out from under this permanent fiscal crisis that we've talked about for such a long period of time, and has allowed us to pay down debt, and has allowed us to actually build up a bit of a rainy day fund. This is something that has happened not because of necessarily luck. The state has worked very hard at this. I have a lot of follow-up questions about these guardrails and what might need to be done to adjust them, but explain how exactly they work, first of all.
well, to explain how they work, we need to explain how they came about.
Yep.
And how they came about was, as we've talked about for the last couple minutes, Connecticut, from the Great Recession of 2008 on, was in a very, very difficult position. We had lots of out-migration of people. We had out-migration of businesses. We had systemic budget deficits, first in the 2009 post-recession budget. When Governor Roy was elected in 2011, he had a $3.6 billion deficit. The year I got elected, we had another $3 billion deficit. So we had systemic deficits, out-migration, people just not believing in Connecticut. And then in 2016, in the first Trump election, the state Senate actually tied 18-18 for the first time since the American Civil War. So when you take a tied state Senate and you take a systemic fiscal crisis, you have a recipe for gridlock.
And that is what happened. I was supposed to get married in October of that year. We planned the wedding way far away from the legislative session, and it kept getting closer and closer and closer to my wedding because we just couldn't find a way to balance the budget. But what I think is a good thing happened, which is that Democrats and Republicans actually did find a way to compromise and pass the first bipartisan budget in decades, if not longer. And that budget instituted what we are now referring to as the fiscal guardrails. What the heck does that mean? What the heck is a fiscal guardrail? Well, it's basic things that most people would understand by just explaining them. A spending cap. We don't spend more money than we take in. A revenue cap. We don't budget more money from a revenue perspective than we take in terms of revenue collection. A bond cap, saying that we're not going to keep putting as much stuff on the credit card. But the one that's paved the way for most of this progress is called the volatility cap. That is a very simple premise, which is that in Fairfield County, there are a lot of people who live here but work on Wall Street. And those folks, unlike me and you, pay their taxes quarterly. And so what was happening was when the market does this, as it sometimes does, we would have a balanced budget in June, But by September, the budget would be out of balance because those individuals who would pay their taxes in that third quarter would see a dip in revenue. So what the volatility cap did was it said, okay, we're going to take all of that money from these high net worth individuals, and we're going to take it put it in a lockbox, not to sound like Al Gore, but put it in a lockbox, and that money can only be spent for two things. It can be spent to bolster our rainy day fund, which at the time of that budget's passage was $233 million. Yeah. And when that rainy day fund is full, at 15% of our budget, which is about $3 billion, then all of that money will just go to pay down our pension debt. At the time of the passage of that budget, we had about $40 billion of pension debt. So fast forward to today, we now have had 6 consecutive years of ending our year with a budget surplus. We have a full rainy day fund at $4 billion because in 2023 we raised the cap from 15% to 18%. And we have paid off $8.5 billion of that pension debt because that rainy day fund is full and now that money is going there. So by many estimations, any indicator you look at, we are in a better place today than we were in 2017. The question now that people are having is, are we doing too well when it comes to restoring the state's finances? And is there a better balance? And that is the topic that is being discussed a little bit here, and I'm sure we're going to get into that more. But it's important for folks to remember how bad it was and how important these reforms were to get us out of this hole. But I think it's really also important for folks to know we're not completely out of that hole yet. And while we have avoided having to make some really tough decisions, a recession is just around the corner. That's the cyclical nature of economics. And when that recession hits, we do not want to be caught flat-footed again like we were in 2009, where we will then lose another decade, as we did during the 2010s, to some very, very difficult choices.
So I guess the first question on this, and a lot of this stuff, if you read the great budget reporter Keith Faniff, who watches this stuff as closely as anybody, perhaps closer than most people, including people in the state legislature. One of the things that Keith has told me is this volatility adjustment, it works, of course, but if you don't adjust this adjustment, if you don't adjust this volatility cap, you end up continuing to take money and put it in this lockbox, as you call it, that maybe doesn't need to go there. I mean, we're calling it volatile, but we actually have been pretty consistent in getting these same funds from these same Fairfield County folks for quite some time now. Isn't it time to tweak that and say, maybe some of that money needs to go to some other stuff? And I can name off some of the things that people would like to see it go to, but maybe isn't it time to make an adjustment here and say, now's the time to take some of that money and put it to work for the people of Connecticut?
So it's easy to sit here 7 years later and say, Monday morning quarterback style, they should have done this, this, and this. But one mistake that I think even the architects of that 2017 reform would
they probably made was the way they calculate the volatility cap threshold. Instead of basing it on an average of 5 or 10 years, they based it on that specific year. And it turned out that that specific year was not a truly representative year when it came to volatility. And so folks that talk about this are talking about this in the context of perhaps if we just adjusted the way we calculate that volatility cap threshold, then we would perhaps have a more representative and accurate volatility cap. The challenge though, John, is that that's like removing one piece of the Jenga set with my 5-year-old, and things get a little wobbly after that, and the integrity of that then changes. Because if you just change the way that we calculate the volatility cap, for example, put aside the merits of doing it or not doing it, you then free up some more money. Yes, that's true. But then you still have a constitutional spending cap in place. You still have other things like a bond lock that when in 2023 the legislature unanimously voted to re-up the guardrails for 5 years, and the treasurer started selling bonds on Wall Street that had language in them saying you shall not adjust this for 5 years.
Well, let me just break it, because I think people understand this piece, that all of these things were done at a time of crisis, and they were all done in a way that work together. The problem now is, like a lot of things that I think that we have to deal with in life, you take a look and you say, okay, I think we really weathered that storm, but do I still need all these boards on my windows 5 years after the hurricane, right? At a certain point, you say that maybe this is a time to unlock some of these things, to think about, do we need to have a spending cap and the bond cap, and do we need to have the volatility cap all at the same time? That doesn't give us the flexibility to help pay for Medicaid reimbursements, that doesn't give us the flexibility to help pay for some other social services that people truly need in the state.
There's no disputing that there are needs out there in Connecticut at all, and I agree with that. But I do strongly believe
We need all those caps. Is there a way for us to do both these things? I think there is. Is there a way for us to perhaps do this in one way or the other, more or less? Yes, there are. But I think what I would say, John, is to go in a different direction, but we can come back. Obviously, you're steering the ship here, man, so you take this where you want to go. But
barely steering anything, as you can tell. People are taking my microphone away from me. I don't even know what's happening.
is that
success turning our finances around. At the same time that many people who live here in this town and in cities and towns all across the state have had their finances go in the wrong direction. And the needs out there are great. Just yesterday on the front page of the Hartford Current, there was a story about a press conference I did with the governor saying that our pension fund is the strongest it's been since I was in high school here at Guilford High School. And the next column down was a report that said 40% of the people in our state have trouble affording to live their lives. And those are statistics that we see out there all the time. What I think we need to do, and our challenge going forward from a budgetary perspective is how do I take the success of what we've done to turn around our finances and make it so that everybody in our state is sharing in that success and feeling that success. And I think another way that we can do that is to change the way we budget, because I think the way we budget is bad. And I was the chair of the Finance Committee for 2 years. I sat in the room while we balanced the budget, and I think the way we do it is backwards. And I don't think the way we do the budget is meeting the needs of the people, because here's how we budget every year. We sit down, we say, this is where we're at today, add inflation onto there, and let's tinker on the margins, add a few other things, and we're going to call that a budget. That's not the way that a household makes their budget. When a household makes their budget, they sit down, they look at every single thing they do and say, do we still need Hulu, Apple TV, Amazon Prime? Do we need all these things? Can we afford our savings goal for this month? Or do we have to tweak that a little bit because we're saving up for this trip? Or did our furnace break and we now have to wipe out our savings and our Hulu for this month? They're looking at this holistically. We don't do that in Connecticut. And I think as we look at the people's feeling about government today, and they have deep pessimism that we can solve their problems, and they don't feel like we're addressing their needs, I believe that the best thing we can do is blow up the way we do our budget, start from zero, figure out whether the things that we're spending money on are actually getting the ROI that we think they are, and as a result of that, free up tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to actually meet the needs that people are doing, and there's a way to meet in the middle. Nobody is addressing it from that perspective. They're just saying, oh, let's just get rid of the guardrails and then we'll be able to solve all our problems. I think that that's a little bit short-sighted.
Okay, so this is good. So now you're steering the ship, because you blew up all the rest of the questions I had to ask, because I really want to dig into this idea of just blowing up the budget process. You're relatively new to this, you've been at this a long time, compared to a lot of the people that are still in the legislature. A lot of the people in the legislature will say to you, you can't just blow up the whole system, Sean. You can't do it. Well, okay, explain to them, first of all, how you're going to do it. Secondly, I just want to get to this. I've had a lot of politicians sit across from me and say, it's just like a household budget. The problem is that the household budget has, like, a couple kids and a dog and a Hulu subscription. They don't have a couple thousand state workers that you have to pay. They don't have colleges that you have to run and all these other things. People's lives depend on you. It's not like a household budget. So how do we think about it differently? Because It's a much bigger thing with built-in costs that you just can't say, we're done with.
I'm going to push back.
And I love that we're going in this direction. Now it's really happening here, so for the 10 people watching at home, tune in. Listen, when I was a state rep, I had this crazy idea, which was to create this thing called the Citizens Budget Workshop. I did it in this building, in the library, over here. And I asked the team at the legislature to come up with a game that we could play, where you start out with a premise. We had a $2 billion budget deficit, and you give each group of people sitting around a table, neighbors, flashcards with different solutions to either cut taxes, raise taxes, cut spending, do these things. And it was an incredibly fascinating political science experiment, because you had people walk in that room with preconceived notions about how hard this was going to be, and they sat down, and within 45 minutes, people who had never served in the legislature, never been on a budget committee, they found consensus and they figured it out. I think it is a disservice to the taxpayers of Connecticut to say, oh, this is too hard for us to do it. It's not hard. 60% of the budget is for fixed costs. You can't do anything about it. So really, we're talking about looking at that 40%, sitting down, and yeah, it would take a while, and it would be unorthodox, and it would piss people off in Hartford, but it's not that hard for us to sit down and say, okay, here is what we spend on the rest of the 40% of the budget that's in our control. It is billions of dollars, but it's not hard for us to say, are we getting the ROI for the $200 million we spent on this program compared to the need that is still out there that's being unmet? The answer a lot of times in Hartford is just put more money towards that. What I'm saying is we need to be smart about how we spend our money, and everyone only thinks about blowing up the budget process in a crisis when they're looking under the cushions for money. You should really be doing it in good times to completely structurally change how you budget, because that's going to help you protect the people you want to help when things are bad.
Okay, so let's go back out to that room out in the hallway here where all the people...
Around with the flashcards, and the citizens are doing this. So the difference between that is they can come up with that, but what they don't have is what you and other, folks who make laws have, which is people coming up to them constantly saying, but here's the thing, I know that you think this is important, but I actually need this for my children. I actually need this for my hometown. I need this to help my business work. And each of these individual constituent ideas or needs are super valid, right? So how do you parse through, are we gonna take some of that money that we have to spend and put it toward our community college system? Or are we gonna put it toward Medicaid reimbursements? How do you make that decision of where those dollars that we can play with are gonna go to help people?
That's the hard part of this.
But you skipped a step, in my estimation, which was you got to figure out where we are at right now. And I'll give you a good example that came up a lot. Routinely, when I would do office hours or coffee and conversation or these budget workshops, I'd have parents that I got to know very well show up here, elderly people in their 70s, sometimes in their 80s, who were caring for their adult disabled children, who would say, my 60-year-old daughter or 50-year-old daughter has been on a wait list for years for services. I need you to help us figure this out. Okay, great, let's figure it out. Why is it that your kids are still on the wait list? Of course, one answer could be, well, they should just add more money to it. A more complicated answer is the fact that DDS, the agency that cares for these kids, 70% of the money in their budget goes to keep an outdated, antiquated place called Southbury Training School open, where there are 100 people. The most recent person who has moved in there about 40 years ago. And we pay for that place to have a fire department, hundreds of employees, hundreds and thousands of dollars to keep the lights on and mow the lawn and do all these things, while these elderly people are being forced to care for their children in homes here in Guilford. Is that the right way to get the best return on investment of our taxpayer dollars? Is to help a small fraction of people while the rest of them are not? No, I don't think so. Is it hard to have the conversation about Southbury Training School? Yes. But you could replicate that in each and every agency in our state and look at what we're actually spending money on. And if it's not helping the most people, we should seriously evaluate whether or not there's a better way to do this. And at the end of that process, I think you're able to have conversations that really get at trying to figure out the true needs of people.
To a question. I'm going to read a verbatim question from one of our member readers here. Very smart readers who ask these questions. They write, we expect a massive withdrawal of funds to support our most vulnerable populations due to the ARPA cliff. This has to do with funding that comes from the federal government. And the promise of the incoming federal government to cut spending. What are the inclinations of this governor to open the budget to provide serious support for the struggling population by funding child care, housing, and related costs? What will be the process? So the reason I wanted to ask that question is we've been talking about what could be a process, but what will be the process for the next couple months for this government?
And this is a reality that we live in, right? This is a reality that you're
Actively living in. I'll give you an example of this. I am very passionate about healthcare. It's one of the main reasons that I ran for this job. It's one of the main reasons I ran for state rep. We have had a lot of success in the last few years of taking people who were uninsured and making them insured through the Affordable Care Act and something called the Exchange here in Connecticut. It's called Access Health CT. 90% of the people who are buying insurance on that exchange are getting subsidized to do that and help to do that from the federal government. President-elect Trump and his administration have questioned whether they will continue those subsidies. I don't know what they will ultimately decide to do. We'll find out. But we can't just wait for that answer. We have to figure out, okay, if they do decide to cut that funding, is there a way for Connecticut to backstop that and help those individuals? That's where you get into this very complicated series of questions. And I think it is hard for us to have conversations like this because every group that will come to the Capitol next year has good intentions. And I sympathize as somebody who, agrees with a lot of the things that they're saying they want to fund, be it housing, healthcare, early childhood education, you name it. But it's a question of how can we sustainably do that? And what I'm suggesting here is that a lot of the debate is focused on we have to open up the guardrails and figure that out. What I'm suggesting is there's another way to meet in the middle too, and that's to look at all the things that we're doing now and figure out whether or not that's justifiable. We spend about $250 million annually on a film tax credit here in Connecticut. We just announced that there's a Christmas movie trail and Hallmark movies, and my wife will kill me for saying this, but they film some Hallmark movies here, the WWE films here, NBC Sports is here, they all take advantage of this big tax credit, but is $250 million to pay big corporations to film a TV show here a better investment than making it affordable for young parents to put their kids in daycare and childcare? That's a debate that we have to have. It's a debate that we're not having, though, because we're starting the budget process by saying, okay, we've got this budget baked in, everything is sacred here, we can't touch anything, we just need to think about the future. And I think there's a better way to think about that.
What about the debate over
Taxes for the top earners, the people who are the CEOs of those very companies, the people that make their homes in Connecticut but perhaps draw their salaries out of New York. There's long been a conversation about whether or not Connecticut could support a higher tax rate for the wealthiest individuals in the state to help to pay for some of these things, especially at a time when the incoming administration clearly is going to work very hard to give those same people federal tax relief.
Again, my job here, I think, is not to make the policy anymore. It's to explain what's going on.
But it seems like you got some
pretty good ideas?
I have
What the policy did.
because I'm a human being and I care about this and I can't help myself, but technically my job is to sort of be that neutral person who explains things. And what I would say to friends of mine who want to have a more progressive tax structure is, again, go back to those guardrails. The spending cap is in the state constitution. It was a constitutional amendment. So even if you raise more taxes from individuals who may get another tax break from the Trump administration, you still can't spend that money. And so I go back to that. And then the second thing I'd say is also, the governor is fond of saying we need more taxpayers, not more taxes. And Connecticut, for the first time in a long time, I think is getting away from a bad reputation that had haunted us for a while of being this very unfriendly state, being a very unaffordable state. And I think one of the lessons that I took away from the last election is that people are just having a hard time out there, and they want to support people, and they want to see their elected officials trying to make it more affordable to be here and live here. I'm not saying that I feel super sympathy for a lot of billionaires that live in Fairfield County. What I'm saying, though, is that we're turning around Connecticut's perception, and we now have an opportunity to grow as a state. And I think the fact that our taxes are less than our neighboring states are probably one of the reasons why you've seen a lot of those people move here. And frankly, those people moving here because the stock market is doing well has been one of the reasons why we have had surging revenues, and there is more money for us to be able to spend under that spending cap in the next biennium budget. So I think, as with all things, it's something that I think warrants a lot of conversation, and it's hard to have these conversations. They're very wonky, but I think we have to have them, and I'm trying to have them as much as I can.
You've been in support of expanded
Tax credit. What would that look like?
Well, what it looks like is
What it would have looked like for my family, right? So, I lived in just about every apartment that was in this town because we moved around a lot. My mom didn't have a lot of money, and when I proposed this for the first time in 2021, it was because I had the lived experience of knowing what that would have meant for my mom and my mom's ability to meet the needs that she had, to keep the lights on and food on the table. It was a big fight, and the governor was opposed to it, and some of my colleagues in the legislature were opposed to it. But we kept working on it because I really believe that it's the right policy. I still believe it's the right policy. At the federal level, my Congresswoman, Rosa DeLauro, has been at this for a very long time, too. She's the godmother of the child tax credit, I guess you could say. And in 2021, in the Inflation Reduction Act, we passed an enhanced child tax credit that in 1 year cut child poverty in this country in half by 50%. There are not a lot of programs that have that level of ROI. So we know these work. But they're expensive. And as everything else we're talking about here, it's something where how do we find a way to make that work? The governor said no at the time to a child tax credit. The legislature at the time said no. What we ended up doing in 2022 was a child tax rebate where we literally mailed $300 per child to families in the state that had kids. The max was 3 kids, and there were a lot of people who got a check for $900 at a time when inflation was skyrocketing. And to this day, people still come up to me and talk about that and say, hey, they don't know that I did it, but they said a couple years ago, I got this money. It helped me be able to get my kids clothes for the new school year or put food on the table. That's the kind of transformational policy that can make a difference. We just need to find a way to put all the pieces of this puzzle together.
What did the Democrats do wrong in this last election that you think
They can learn from.
Listen, I think it goes back to where we started the conversation. I think a couple things. Number one, I think we are a party that believes that we are the party of working people, but a lot of working people in this state and country no longer believe that we are the party that is looking out for them. And we, in some cases, have a little bit of an identity crisis because of that, because of the policies that we are fighting for. Some people just don't believe that that's for them. A lot of that, I think, has to do with cultural issues, which now dominate a lot of politics. And there's 1,000,001 hot takes from politicians and pundits, and everyone's got the brilliant idea of how we're going to do this. I think it really just goes back to we need to figure out how we can communicate with people, and specifically how we can once again communicate with the people that for years and years and years were the base of our party that have now turned in different directions. I drive around this town because I've lived here for my entire life, and there are people who used to have lawn signs for myself and for Democrats that now have signs for Trump on their lawn. When I ran for this job in 2016, or for state rep, there were people who had my sign and Donald Trump's sign, right? Politics is not so neat and clean that we're all Democrats or we're all Republicans. People vote for who they think is going to have their best interests, and that does frustratingly ping pong.
Yeah, but so I mean, this is the thing things you said earlier.
You learn from Chris Murphy, you talk to people, you learn what they have to say, and so you're feeling that people don't think that the Democratic Party is necessarily representing them or representing their interests. But, I mean, what exactly specifically are you hearing in that? What I hear you saying is you want to help people get their, kids what they need. You want to have people get, a strong economy. That all sounds like stuff that is going to help them. But that's not what they're hearing, I guess.
Well, it's not what they're hearing.
For sure not what they're hearing. And second, they don't believe it because they haven't seen this change impact their life, right? Governor Lamont passed the biggest tax cut in the history of our state 2 years ago. If you did a poll right now of the people of Connecticut, how much did the tax cut affect you? There would be a very big portion of the poll respondents that said, what tax cut? Because they don't even know that happened for them. And I think that is a problem that we have as a party. We just are not great at communicating that. But I'll give you an example because you asked me for one. My 5-year-old son is obsessed with hockey, is like super obsessed with hockey. And he plays youth hockey every Saturday morning and every Sunday morning. And we go to the rink in Northford, not far from here, and it's a stereotypical, a bunch of guys who are just hanging around, arms crossed and talking and, having this conversation. And I talked to these guys, right? And a couple weekends ago, one of them turned to me and he said, you know what, I heard about you. You're a politician? And I said, yeah, I'm a politician. I kind of was like, oh God, where are we going with this? And he goes, the most surprising thing is you're a Democrat? And I said, yeah, I'm a Democrat. And I said, why? He said, because you don't seem like a Democrat. I said, what do you mean? He's like, well, you're not a stuck-up elitist. You're not telling me how to live my life. You're talking to me about Yellowstone and Morgan Wallen, and I just can't believe that you know about these things that are important to me because I think that every single Democrat hates me. And I took that very seriously because that guy was not joking, and that guy was not kidding around. And that conversation could be replicated all across the state because we've become caricatures, and our opponents are caricatures, and people don't see us as possibly for them anymore because they think that we're for somebody else. And I think the answer here is, yes, a little bit of policy and changing the way we talk about things, but it's more about just getting back to communicating with the people who, in my mind, should be thinking about being open to Democrats, but no longer are.
But I think a hard thing for Democrats, especially Democrats who have sort of the background, people would traditionally, in a lot of the country would say, you're a liberal Democrat, even if you're not as liberal as some Democrats. You want to help and support and be able to talk to Hockey Dad. But if part of what he's saying is he doesn't think you're representing him because you're representing other people, but you are representing other people. You're representing people who don't look like him, who don't think like him, who don't dress like him, who don't care about the same things as him. And you still want to and need to support those people too. That's a hard line because it sounds like what he's saying is you need to be different to support me, but you can't be different because you're also supporting all these other people.
That guy made me think that.
Because that's how he's been conditioned to think because of the rhetoric that's out there. What I haven't figured out yet, and I lose a lot of sleep over, is when I was a state rep here and I did those coffee and conversations, maybe 30 people would show up, maybe 40 people would show up, and inevitably people would walk in there and I could just tell based on maybe their body language or maybe they didn't make eye contact with me, that they were there to maybe yell at me. And what would happen is there would be somebody who would get up to yell about something, and the tone of the conversation would go down because we were all sitting in a circle, and it's kind of weird to yell at somebody when you're kind of sitting around a circle. But then I would watch that person as other people would say what they wanted to say. And when the temperature came down and we actually had a conversation, you'd see light bulbs go off, not just on people that were there to yell at, but for people that might be there to yell at somebody else or yell about something else. And I think that that's the point that I'm making, is that we don't talk to each other anymore. We're very siloed. People are culturally siloed. People don't have friends with different demographics now. They don't talk to people who are different than them or look different from them. But when you are able to have these conversations and debates, it's possible, I think, to get people to understand that it's not me versus them. It's not a scarcity mindset. We can all succeed together. But man, I don't know how to do that at a statewide level, and I certainly don't know how to do it at the national level, because you become these caricatures. And people think they know about them because they'll never have the chance to meet them. That's why we're so polarized, right? 45% of people are going to vote in there and vote against you no matter what you say or do. But I ran for this job. I keep saying this job. I don't have this job anymore. I'm not a state rep. But since we're sitting in our auditorium, I ran for state rep in 2014. I had that tough race. I got elected. At the time that I ran for that job, both of the towns that I represented were controlled by Republicans, and I was a Democrat. I never had an opponent again for 3 consecutive elections. And the thing that I'm more proud of than probably anything else, and nobody knows this maybe except for my mom and me and now you, is that in 2020, the last time I ran for state rep, I got 20,000 votes. And I didn't know this, but the Secretary of State wrote a little note to me and said, congratulations, you got more votes for state rep than anybody running in the state of Connecticut in 2020. And I just take that as a sign that over that period of time that I did this job, people got to know me. They maybe disagree with me, maybe they didn't agree on everything, but they knew that I was trying to facilitate those conversations. The trick is, how do we scale that up and do this at a statewide level, and frankly at a national level? I don't know how to do that.
Okay, so
With that point in mind, I just want to say we're just at 8 o'clock right now. I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and just take a couple extra minutes because they were trying to take my microphone in the middle of this whole thing, and I lost a whole minute or two. Talk about ramping it up. So do you want to be governor someday?
Listen, what I've said to people is, yes, I would love to maybe run for governor someday. And the reason for that is not because I'm power hungry or because I have this diabolical plan to do this and this is just every step of the way. It's because
I've always ran for public office because I genuinely want to help people. And there is no job that you can do more good and help more people than that job. People said to me when I was younger, oh, you should run for Congress. It's just not appealing to me to go to Washington, to leave my boys, to go down there, to tweet at people and fight people and go on cable news and try to raise money every 30 seconds. It's not appealing to me at all.
And I told you when Chris Murphy entered into that job.
That's what he told me. Is like, man, I got to keep raising money. He looked beat down, but he stayed at it. But anyway, continue. Yeah.
We're willing to go down there and fight for the things that are important to us. It's just not for me. But I work really closely with the governor, and I see each and every day the power of that job to really move the needle and do a lot of the things that we've been talking about that I might be able to have a press conference about, or I might be able to write an op-ed about, but I can't necessarily do it as the comptroller. As the governor, you can do those things. What I've said is I think he should run again. I like him. I think he's doing a really good job. I think he has found a good style of governance that people on both the left and the right respect. And I think he's popular as a reflection of that, and I think he is going to run again. But if he doesn't, I would certainly think about it. And my wife tells me all the time, and if she's watching, trying to put our kids to sleep, she will laugh at me saying this, but she also reminds me all the time, I have time. I'm a pretty young guy. And I love the job I have, and I'm not in a rush to leave it. But that's a job that few people who are being honest with you would tell you they don't want, and I'm being honest with you.
Well, and just a short follow-up to that is so as you approach this with that
in mind, potentially, as being as honest as you can, how often do you think about the decisions you make now being something that is going to come up for gubernatorial candidate Scanlon in X number of years? I mean, it's got to come up, right? You got to be thinking about this like, well, this doesn't look very good in 8 years if I do it this way.
Ask that question again. Are you asking me, do I make every decision in the prism of running? No.
Every decision, but you must make some decisions with the idea in mind that
I want to be governor someday, perhaps, and something that I do right now is going to somehow affect that. Do you have to necessarily think about that calculus when you're making decisions as comptroller right now?
honestly, I don't think.
You don't?
About that. Yeah. No, somebody gave me good advice when I was first starting out in politics, which is so many people in politics are always thinking about every single move they make is to get the next thing. And the people who go far in politics are the ones who just try to do the best job in the job they have, and doors naturally open for you. The other thing that I have tried really hard to do, and we didn't get to, are some of the policies that I've driven as the comptroller are things that people have been really afraid to touch, right, with a 10-foot pole. I'm not afraid to fail in my job, because that's the whole point of running, is to do things, and sometimes you get them done and sometimes you don't. But so many politicians are afraid to fail today because they think that it's going to be used against them down the road. I think the opposite is true. When you try to tackle things and maybe you don't get it done, or maybe it doesn't work out, I think people give you credit for that, especially in today's day and age where the bar is like beneath the stage for what people think that politicians can get done. That when you actually can get those things done, then I think people say, all right, well, that's a guy that maybe is willing to tackle other stuff, and we'll see what happens. But, my dad was an alcoholic in long-term recovery, and when I was a kid and my parents got divorced, I spent a lot of time sitting in the corners of AA meetings because he had no babysitter, and at the time I thought that was very weird, but it actually, I think, has made me better at my job because I literally heard a lot of stuff in those rooms. But the thing I always think about, my dad died 17 years ago, was that he lived his life one day at a time, because that's what you have to do when you're in recovery. You can't think about tomorrow, you can't think about a year from now, you gotta think of the day that's in front of you. And that's how I try to live my life, one day at a time. I got a gift of being able to do the job I have now. I had a big gift to be the state rep for my hometown. Serving in elected office is something that I never ever take for granted, because it was not in the cards for me. I didn't grow up with a rich family or a powerful family. I'm here because I did a book report about Bobby Kennedy, and I don't take that for granted. We'll see what happens in my life, but seriously, one day at a time.
Yeah, and I'm being honest with this. Thank you for sharing.
I appreciate it. Comptroller Scanlon, thank you for being here, and thank you for being such a lovely audience. I have just a little bit of stuff to say at the end here. I want to thank the folks at Guilford High School for helping us coordinate this event. Nice round of applause. Beautiful space here. Thank you to our friends at West Hartford Community Interactive for live streaming this event. I'd like to thank our sponsors once again, the Mohegan Tribe, Connecticut Business and Industry Association, Eversource, Clifton Larson Allen, the Causeway Agency, Express Strategies, Hinckley Allen, and Rowthorne Law. We invite you to join us next year. Coming up next year, we will continue this In the Room series. We'll have recurring guests like Governor Lamont, Senator Murphy, Senator Blumenthal, and also members of our congressional delegation. We have a lot of people to thank who put these things together. I just want to thank one person. Brianna Nelson is our events coordinator. This is her last event that she's been doing with us. She's going off to law school. Can you believe that?
Good luck.
Yeah, I know, right? She's going off to law school, which sounds like a really good gig. Congratulations to you, Brianna, and thank you for all the great work this whole year. Thank you so much for watching. Good night, everyone. Drive home safe. Hey, thank you. That was awesome. Yeah. I really appreciate it. Yeah, when we do it this way,